Hello, and welcome back to NonCompete, the communist propaganda outlet that's fun for the whole family. I should, of course, warn you that we occasionally say words like fuck, but we always bleep it out in the first 30 seconds of the video, and that's because YouTube's fine with profanity, but only if it sneaks in through the back door unexpectedly. Over the last few weeks, we've seen a surge in new subscribers, and it's clear that while you all come from different backgrounds and all around the world, if you found this channel, you probably share a common feeling, a deep concern about the state of the world, and we feel it too. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Fascism is on the rise right now, and it's terrifying. I mean, fascism's always been festering beneath the facade of capitalism, of course, but now that facade is crumbling away in the imperial core, and we're in the midst of upheaval and uncertainty. If you felt that gut-wrenching fear, that sense of dread that things are spiraling out of control all around you, you're not alone. Lots of people feel the way you do. I think that's why so many people are finding channels like this to look for answers. Our world is entering a new stage of development right now. It feels more hostile day by day to regular workers. In my home country, the USA, the police have been fully militarized over the last few decades, and the military is now poised to act as a modern-day Gestapo, rounding up immigrants if Trump gets his way. Inequality is worsening. Trans folks are being scapegoated. Open misogyny is on the rise. Genocide is being committed openly with the full-throated support of wealthy nations like the USA, and it's easy to feel like the worst is yet to come. And the truth is, things will probably get a whole lot worse before there's any hope that they'll get better. But throughout all this, here's what we need to remember. Even in the darkest times, we are not powerless. Now, the fascists and even the bourgeois liberals want us to believe that we're powerless, and they spend a lot of resources trying to convince us that we are powerless. They want us to feel small, isolated, and hopeless. The fascists want us to bow down before them like the tyrants they are, while the liberals want us to think we need their protection from fascism and that we should be willing to compromise our own class interests to receive that protection. And hey, you know what? You probably are powerless. I'm talking about you as an individual. I know that I, as an individual, have precious little power, but we, the workers of the world, are not powerless. In fact, the workers have all the power, and that's precisely why the ruling class uses fascism, bigotry, hatred, and fear to divide us, so that we remain conquered. Because as soon as class consciousness becomes the norm, and we understand that there are way more of us than there are of them, that is when the days of capitalism and fascism will truly be numbered. We have all the power, you see. We control the means of production. We can stop the means of production. We can seize the means of production. But the power that we have is disorganized and fractured. And the solution, therefore, is not compromising with fascists, and it's not yielding to a lesser evil. It's organizing, uniting, and leveraging the power that we as workers already possess. Unfortunately, a lot of workers are just so conditioned by capitalism to this kind of doomer mindset. We've received so many comments on our videos here at NonCompete and over at my partner's channel, Luna Oy, over the last few weeks from people who say that it's hopeless, that fascism's grip is just too strong, that communism is impossible to build in the imperial core, that we might as well just give up. And look, I can understand why people feel this way. It's hard not to feel this way sometimes when every day brings another barrage of headlines delivering even more bad news. I can understand why people fall into doomerism, but I cannot accept it. And neither should you. It feels like I especially see this doomer mindset coming from my fellow workers from my home country, the USA. And I can understand why. Things do seem pretty bleak right now in the USA. Project 2025 and the MAGA agenda just took control of every branch of our government. So, that's not cool. I can understand that. But before we jump into doomerism and how it pertains to the USA and how we can fight doomerism, I just want to say oi to all of our comrades in Brazil, because by and large, we've seen really, really uplifting, positive messages coming from our Brazilian comrades in the comments. A lot of you say things things are tough. Of course, you have to deal with Bolsonaro and fascism in Brazil trying to have a resurgence. It's not, a ideal situation for you in Brazil. I understand that, but I'm just hearing so many Brazilians saying that, yeah, things are tough right now, but we're going to keep fighting. We're going to keep building. We're going to build communism in Brazil. And that's a really great attitude to have. I really admire that, and I do wish you all the best. And solidarity in your attempts to build a working class movement in Brazil. But anyway, back to doomerism in my home country. Let me first just say, if you are from the USA, fascism and oppression, you know this, are nothing new to the USA. We're definitely going through a quality shift lately. And I do believe that fascism's taking a higher form in the USA than it has before. But it's not new. Black folks, indigenous folks, trans and other LGBTQ plus folks, disabled folks, and other marginalized groups have been suffering a great deal since the very beginning of the USA. And now, as fascism comes into this new higher form, it is the time to build stronger connections with and between all these marginalized, fractured strata of the working class, and to lift and support one another up against the brutality of the United States bourgeois regime. We can show solidarity, we can protect our neighbors and our fellow community members, and we can resist together and build together. It's an opportunity if we make it one. I also want to point out that my partner Luna, over at Luna Oi, she's a Vietnamese communist, also happens to be my spouse. She's had a lot of comments on her videos saying that it would be impossible for the USA to have a communist uprising like the one in Vietnam, as though Vietnamese people are magical socialism fairies that have, this unique ability to build a revolution. They're not. They're not built different from us Americans. They're human beings. We're human beings. Yes, they had very different material conditions going into the revolution. Yes, our revolution is going to look very different from theirs, but we're all just people. And you can't think that they're like metaphysically on some different plane of existence than we are. They struggled, they fought, they overcame. We can do the same thing. We have a different starting position. We have a long way to go. But yeah, it really annoys both of us when we see those comments. Let me tell you something else. Vietnamese communism didn't spring fully grown and clad in armor from the top of Zeus's head. In 1941, Ho Chi Minh returned to Vietnam after more than 30 years abroad, fighting and struggling to build international support for the liberation of his homeland. He arrived with only 5 comrades. He had to sneak across the border, hide in the mountains as he built support against Japanese fascism. All through the 1920s and 30s, while Ho Chi Minh was abroad, the few communists who were in Vietnam at the beginning had to hand copy with pen and paper communist literature and translate it into Vietnamese. And if the French or the Japanese colonial administrators caught them distributing that or teaching their fellow workers, they'd suffer terrible fates just for possessing that kind of literature. And do you really think that we have it worse right now than they did? Despair doesn't just stop us from acting, it drains our energy. It actively undermines the work of those who are building and fighting to build and protect their communities. There was a Vietnamese communist fighter and poet, and he said, "We'd rather shine bright for a moment than be in dull despair for 100 years. Despair doesn't just stop us from acting, it drains our energy. It actively undermines the work of those who are already fighting to build and protect their communities. And worse yet, it strengthens our enemy's position. When we give in to despair, we're abandoning the very people that we should be fighting for. At the end of the day, concern and consternation need to be funneled into productive activity. We must be realistic and sober about the crises we face, but we must never give up hope. And I'm not, by the way, shaming people for being depressed or down or, having mental suffering right now, mental illness and disability. I myself suffer from depression. I know what it's like to not be able to get out of bed for a week because of a bout of depression. That's not what I'm talking about, okay? And depression is not an excuse for dragging other people down. We shouldn't use mental illness and neurodivergence, which I'm also neurodiverse. We shouldn't use these as excuses to harm other people or our movement. In fact, it hurts disabled people, mentally ill people, and neurodiverse people when you make that kind of association and act like, oh, I'm dragging this movement down because I'm depressed. That's not a side effect of depression, okay? If you're depressed, get therapy, take medication. It's fine to work on yourself and take care of yourself. I have to take breaks sometimes to prevent from burning out. I have bouts of depression where I have to, take care of that. Take care of yourself first and then come back, is all I'm saying, okay? So now let me tell you the solution, because there is an antidote to doomerism. There is a better way to set your mind, and that is revolutionary optimism. A couple years ago, I made a video all about revolutionary optimism.
As revolutionists, our optimism must never devolve into simple wishful thinking or idealist optimism. We have to know from the get-go what's at stake, and that we will face all sorts of trials and tribulations, and that revolutionary optimism, therefore, will not always be joyful optimism. It will often be sorrowful. We must accept that through our struggle towards victory, all of us will suffer, sacrifices will be made, and many will die in the fight for freedom.
There's a link in the description if you want to watch that, but if you haven't seen it already, I'll briefly summarize. Revolutionary optimism demands that we have a realistic and grounded understanding of reality, and in that sense, it is much different from what we ordinarily think about optimism. Revolutionary optimists do not bury our heads in the sand. We do not ignore the very real dangers that surround us. We don't just assume everything's going to be okay. We face that danger head on, and we pick the best path forward given the real, objective material conditions at hand. Revolutionary optimism means looking at the crisis we're in with clear eyes, again, seeing reality for what it is, but refusing to let that reality crush us or drive us to inactivity and despair. In order to win, we have to fight back against these systems of oppression. And if we want to fight back effectively, we need to understand how to fight. We cannot just act on instinct. We need to study the nature of reality, the relationships between conscious activity and the material world. We need to know what's possible and what's not. That's why I study the philosophy of dialectical materialism. It's a scientific way of understanding human history, politics, and the world so that we can learn how systems evolve and change over time, how change and development occurs, and most importantly, how we can impact and shape that change to bring about the end of capitalism once and for all. These tools of philosophy and methodology aren't just abstract academic pursuits. They are practical. They are pragmatically focused on the liberation of the working class. They have been honed through experience by comrades to help us identify the systems we're up against and how to dismantle them piece by piece. And if you're new to this movement, you want to deepen your understanding of dialectical materialism, we got you covered. You can download our free ebook on dialectical materialism. It's the Vietnamese curriculum that my wife translated. I helped to edit and annotate it. You'll find the link in the description. It's at banyanhouse.org/shop. There is a free ebook. You can also buy a print copy, but the ebook is absolutely free. You can print it out yourself, share it with your comrades. We would love for you to do that. And within the next month or two, we're going to be coming out with part 2 of the book on historical materialism. That book, I'm telling you, if you've read the dialectical materialism book, the historical materialism book goes deeper into explaining how capitalism works and functions, how history develops over time, the objective material basis of history, how capitalism will end, and what we can do to bring about that end more quickly by building power for the working class. So, plug in the books, but just because we think that they're really a valuable tool. And I hope that you will check that out if you haven't already. No matter how strong fascism, colonialism, and imperialism seem right now, history shows us that those forces are not invincible, they're not inevitable. And if you study historical materialism and dialectical materialism, you know that those forces will eventually give way to our communist movement. We can fight back. We will win. It might take a very long time, but we will win. In fact, I should say it is dialectical materialist and historical materialist analysis coupled with practice in the real world, which led to the development of revolutionary optimism as a philosophy, as a mindset, as an application. So in that sense, revolutionary optimism isn't just some abstract idea, and it's not just to make us feel better. It is a practice that is guided by real movements through history. It was developed by comrades who were out there on the front lines fighting oppression. So I want to look at how those principles of revolutionary optimism have been applied by comrades in the past. We could start with the Black Panthers, for example. They didn't sit around waiting for conditions to deteriorate further. They organized. They created free breakfast programs. They organized community defense programs. They educated their communities, and they built solidarity. They didn't just roll over and accept defeat. They got organized. And although the Black Panthers were ultimately dismantled, that should be noted, they won some very important victories, and they showed us that it is possible for workers in the USA to fight back and to have victories at all. Their legacy lives on, and we can learn from those successes and their failures. And we'll talk about that more later, why failure is important, and we have to fail sometimes. We have to fail a lot to build upon that legacy. As the Black Panther martyr Fred Hampton said, before we can win, we have to believe we can win. And by the way, if you study historical materialism and you study the way capitalism functions and all the internal contradictions of capitalism, you will know that we will win. That it's an objective fact. First of all, everything ends eventually. The Roman Empire fell, great dynasties have fallen that, people thought would last forever. Nothing lasts forever. Capitalism will end. How we act right now, how we get involved will impact how capitalism ends, how quickly it ends, how terrible the suffering of the working class will be as we move towards that ending. And we have to remember, nobody in history has won a victory through surrender. I know in the comments someone's going to talk about some weird situation where somebody won through surrender. Go ahead and do that, actually. That sounds interesting, but you get what I'm saying. There's no reason for us to have this doomer surrendering mindset right now. I mean, look at Vietnamese communists, again, who suffered some of the worst conditions imaginable under Japanese occupation. When everyone was starving and afraid, they stole back rice from the fascists. They raided Japanese armories for weapons to fight back. Read Vong Wen-Zap's book, People's War, People's Army, and read about how amazing it was that these Vietnamese guerrillas who just had no weapons at all would raid Japanese armories and steal the weapons to fight back against the Japanese fascists. They managed to teach Marxist theory to illiterate peasants. They didn't have social media. They didn't have the internet. They didn't have printers. And the peasants couldn't even read. Nearly all Vietnamese peasants and enslaved people and workers were highly illiterate, but they still taught Marxism to them. In the tunnels of Cu Chi, they were teaching classes as bombs were falling over their heads. They coupled revolutionary optimism with a scientific understanding of political struggle. They defeated colonial France, fascist Japan, and American imperialism, and they won their own liberation. Do you think that it was easy for them to do that? Do you think that they never had moments of despair? They never had setbacks and losses which seemed insurmountable at the time? Do you think that when Hanoi was being carpet bombed, it was easy for those people to fight on? But fight on they did. And in the end, look what happened. They won. The Vietnamese communists struggled and sacrificed to save their fellow workers, to lift them up, to organize them, to teach them. Or, as the Vietnamese often like to put it, you can't just lay on your back and open your mouth and hope that fruit will fall into your mouth. You got to stand up and you got to fight for that dang fruit. It's really hard to make that sound inspiring, but you get the point. Yeah, you got to fight for the fruit. You see what I'm saying there? I've been eating a lot more fruit lately. Sound off in the comments if you like fruit. Another thing that the Vietnamese and the Black Panthers had in common was that they weren't afraid of making mistakes. And yes, they made plenty of mistakes. They failed all the time. Fred Hampton said, you have to make mistakes to learn from those mistakes. Ho Chi Minh said, communists are not afraid of making mistakes. We are afraid of making mistakes and not correcting them. Making mistakes is how science progresses. It's how we learn what will work and what won't work in the social laboratories that we call our communities. If you're not sure what to do, just do something. See what happens, learn from that experience, and struggle onward. Of course, that doesn't mean you should just act spontaneously without any kind of plan of action. In fact, as workers, we have way fewer resources than the ruling class. So we do have to be strategic and thoughtful about how we proceed, but we can't fall into analysis paralysis. We need to study theory and history and be methodical and patient and mindful of how development processes function as we proceed. See, building a revolution is not a straightforward A to B sort of process. It's more like crossing a rushing river where you can't see the bottom. Many communists in Asia have used this metaphor to describe how progress happens step by step, feeling for stability as you go. You have to move yourself across, feeling for the stones with your feet. You know where you are now. You can see the bank on the other side. You know where you want to go. You know your material conditions and you know your objective. But getting from here to there is really a matter of trial and error and learning as you go. So as communists, we must understand the feedback loop between theory and practice so that every step forward is a step towards our goal, even if it results sometimes in short-term failure. Revolutionary optimism isn't about ignoring how bad things are. It's about recognizing how bad things are and finding a way to make them better. It's about planting the seeds of hope in the garden of despair and showing the world that a better future is not just possible, but it will come about. Because we understand the truth. We understand the material processes of history. We know that fascism will fail. It has too many internal contradictions. Look at the Trump administration. Look at that cabinet he's building as an example. Do you think those people are going to have long-term success in what they're trying to accomplish? They will certainly do a lot of damage. They are a threat we should take seriously, but they're also a clown show. Both of those things can be true at the same time. And they are going to fail spectacularly eventually. And we need to be there organizing and preparing for that downfall so that we're in a better position when it happens to build our own movement in its ruins. Capitalism will eventually collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. The objective forces of history are unstoppable, and the future belongs to the workers. If you want to do something as an individual, but you really just don't know what to do, where to go, I might suggest our most recent video where I give a lot of tips for people who are just starting out as communists. It talks about how you can educate yourself, how you can deprogram yourself, and it encourages you to join an organization, which I want to echo. You do need to join an organization. You can't just act alone. You can't just read theory. You have to work with other people and build something with them. So if you haven't already seen the video, there's a link in the description. You can watch it. If you have already seen the video, you know what to do. Educate yourself, join an organization, and get to work. Doomerism and fearful inactivity, these are weapons that can only be turned against yourself. Spreading around pessimism and nihilism is taking the stand of the enemy. It's tantamount to aiding and abetting that enemy. It is harmful to our fellow workers and to our movements. So we should treat it no differently, in my opinion, from any other sort of fascist facilitation. We should shut doomerism down. We don't stand idly by when we see fascist or bigoted speech, do we? So why would we stand idly by while wreckers and doomers try to disrupt action and organization and pull us off of the path that we're all on? We should instead address it, call it out, push back against it, stand up against doomerism, just as we stand up against fascism. This is our moment to build, to change the world, to organize. Doomers work against that motion. They aren't telling hard truths. They're spreading dangerous lies and misinformation. They're trying to take our movement off the rails. If you're still feeling unsure, that's okay. If you feel down, that's okay. If you feel depressed, like I said, I get depressed myself. But just don't let that uncertainty and that depression turn into inaction. For the love of God, don't become a wrecker because you feel bad. It's time for those of us who are able to get to work. It's time for those of us who have the ability to assist those who have the need. Check in on your comrades, on your neighbors, on your fellow workers. Make sure that they're okay, wherever you are. Start having conversations. You don't have to tell them right off the bat that you're a commie and that they should rise up and break the chains of capitalism. Know your audience. But it's time to start having conversations, to start taking care of each other. It's time to get to work. I'm EJ. This is NonCompete. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.